What is your most terrifying animal encounter? Story 1. I'm from Florida and I was volunteering at a local nature conservancy. One of our tasks was to remove fallen logs that were blocking up a creek after a big storm. The creek was about chest deep, 15 feet wide, and opaque brown. Many Florida freshwater ways are browns BC of tannins leached into the river from trees. As I'm moving logs, I notice a 12 feet alligator on the embankment I hadn't noticed before. It then slid into the creek I was in. I was with a land manager who was moving logs with me and a herpetologist who was in the canoe. I asked them what to do and they responded, well, those logs aren't gonna move themselves and that gator's probably just trying to get away from us. Still, spending 30 minutes in a creek where you can't see anything, knowing there's an alligator lurking near your feet, moving logs that look like alligators, was one of the most nerve-wracking things I've ever done. Story 2. I've been woken up by a bear sniffing my head once. Was cowboy camping, no tent, in Lyle Canyon in Yosemite once, when I heard something sniff right next to my head. My sleep-addled brain thinks it's a ranger on a horse telling me to move my camp. Had hiked about 20 miles that day. You have to be at least 4 miles into the canyon to camp, and I wasn't 100% sure I'd made it far enough since it was dark when I set up camp. Anyway, I say, just 1 second, sit up, grope for my flashlight, and turn it on to see a black bear a couple of feet away. I holler, and he tears off. I get out and empty my bladder and try to fall back asleep until I hear him coming around again. I make a bunch more noise, decide I'm not getting any more sleep, break camp, and slowly hike until the sun rises. Story 3. When I was 12, a young stallion decided he wanted to play with me and almost killed me. He kicked and bit me and tried to trample me. He was my pet and was only treating me the way he'd treat a peer. I even knew that while it was happening. I made a huge mistake by turning my back on him while he was playful. He bit me and pulled me down, knocked me down a couple of more times with a forefoot when I tried to get up, reared up over me to stamp me a couple of times too. Still have the scar on my leg, and that was a long time ago. Literally myself during it. My dad basically saved my life by chasing him off. His response was, "That was close. What did you learn?" Story 4. At the time I was working until 1 a.m. so I wouldn't get home until 2 or so. I opened the door to the house and felt what I thought was a breeze come by my leg. I don't really pay attention. Walk over to my desk, put my keys down, and turn the light on. Right when I do so, there are 2 possums in the act of mating in the middle of my kitchen. They screamed, I screamed, and we began the 3-hour dance of getting them out of my house. I ended up trapping them in a dog cage and dumping them out in the middle of my backyard. Story 5. I moved to Colorado. About a month and one night I had gone to bed and woke up in severe pain hours later. I felt nausea and throbbing pain around my abdomen and my muscles and back ached. I turned on the lights and in my sleep rolled over a black widow spider and crushed it to death, which at some point had bit me. Its carcass lay in my bed. I freaked out, called 911 and put it in a mason jar so they thought I wasn't crazy. I was brought to the hospital where they treated me with pain management medications. The venom continued to spread. Every muscle aches and feels as though my body is being crushed. It soon began to get hard to breathe and my blood pressure became irregular. The morphine has me drifting in and out of sleep. I prayed to God, who hours earlier I wasn't even sure I believed in. I was discharged 12 hours ago. The venom ran its course for about 4 days, and the bite site intermittently itched for weeks. For the next year or 2, I had anxiety trying to go to sleep and recurring nightmares of the experience. Black widow spiders. Story 6. When I was young, I went fishing with my dad and my best friend. We waded out through some deeper water to reach the shallow sandbar where we fished for quite a while. The tide came in, and the water that had been just above my ankles was now above my waist. Suddenly, a large shark about 7 to 8 feet crashed through a school of mullet only a few feet away from me. Dad saw it, my best friend saw it, and for a second we all 3 just kind of froze with our mouths hanging open. Quietly, calmly, Dad told us to walk back to shore, splashing as little as possible. We did, but the tide had come in and I wasn't as tall as the other 2 guys. The deeper water between the sandbar and shore reached their chests, but I could hardly keep my head above water while my feet barely bounced along the bottom and I struggled to hold my fishing rod up out of the water. I was completely helpless when we knew that a hungry shark was swimming somewhere in the area. It felt like a scene out of a nightmare, trying to run from an invisible monster, but my feet could barely touch the ground and I was hardly moving. I knew, and even knew at that moment, that I had little chance of being eaten by a shark, especially one who is focused on fish. Still, if I ever were to be attacked, that was the moment, and I was utterly defenseless. A few years later, a man was killed just a few miles away when he jumped off his dock and into the path of a large bull shark that was chasing a mullet. Story 7. Growing up, my grandma babysat me. She lived with my uncle. He had a Rottweiler who was very friendly. One day when I was 9-10, I decided I wanted to pretend to be a wrestler. I did this by putting white masking tape on my hands and arms. I ended up fighting stuffed animals and all that. When I got tired, I just grabbed some action figures and went to the carport, which had deer stands. This was where the Rottweiler also slept, so the dog was asleep when I got there. I started playing with the toys. A few minutes later, I heard the dog stirring. I pay no mind to it. I then hear growling. I turn around and the dog is growling at me. I try to let her know it is me, but she is still growling. I then slowly back away and she lunges at me. Being the somewhat smart kid I was, I noticed immediately she was going for my arms. I rip off the masking tape, throw it at the dog, and run back into the house. Avoided that dog for days until I was asked to feed her. She was friendly again. Story 8. This isn't from me but from my mate. Once, on a school camp for 21 days in Alpine, Australia, we were forced to sleep alone for 48 hours. So at around 2 a.m. on the second night, I heard a shout from where he was sleeping. He told me the next morning that a kangaroo stole his hiking pack and that in panic he threw a water jug at it. Lo and behold, the kangaroo regrouped after a short time and surrounded him in a circle. All he remembered were like 5 pairs of eyes staring back at him in the night. I have yet to ask him how he managed to fend them off. But yeah, that's Australia for you. Story 9. I was solo hiking in the Porcupine Mountains in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan last autumn. Although I was by myself, there were plenty of other backpackers up there those couple of days. I ran across a bear print on the trail one morning. A few hours later, I rounded a corner of the trail, and about 70 feet up ahead, I saw the hindquarters of an animal with dark brown fur about 2 feet high. I got a surge of adrenaline, and everything started going in slow motion. I started to panic, and just as the poop was about to leave my butt, the animal lifted its head, and it ended up being a black Labrador retriever. Right as I catch my breath, the dog's owner comes rounding the corner from the opposite direction and sees me clutching my chest. Story 10. Getting charged by a black bear. I was hunting elk and walking on an old 90-year-old railroad grade in some dense forest, and I saw some movement in a tree. I get to look, and it is 2 bear cubs. Oh, shit. I look around, and through a somewhat clear spot for the trees I see Mom, and she is headed right for me at this point. I was hunting with a fairly large rifle, a .375 H&H Magnum, so I decided to give her one warning shot, and if I had to shoot a second time, it would be in self-defense. I put one round into the dirt in front of her, and thankfully she decided that the cannon that just fired at her was something she didn't want any part of, and she scrambled back and took off into the brush. I also noped the f*** out of there, and didn't go that way the rest of the season. She can have that spot. Story 11. When I was just 5 years old, my neighbor had a Doberman who was usually a very friendly dog. However, one day I go into his backyard to ride one of his bikes that he usually lets me ride. As I was exiting the backyard, the Doberman jumped on me and knocked me to my butt and pinned me down, staring me in the face, growling viciously. Eventually, the neighbor came out of the house and yelled at him, "Damien, get back in here." I don't know if that dog ever wanted to really kill me or just scare me. Story 12. I ran into a swarm of bees. I was young and in Straya, and we lived on the front of a farm. I went exploring a lot. It was really cool. I found a bee's nest in a huge fallen tree. I had watched a lot of cartoons and wanted to know if the bees would come out in an arrow and get me if I whacked it with a stick. So I did. They did not. I was disappointed and climbed around the fallen tree. The bees do attack, just not immediately, and not in an arrow, in a cloud. Suddenly, they were all around me. I sprinted home, about 2K, and if I slowed down, the bees caught up. I ran into our yard and shut the gate, thinking I was safe. I wasn't, obviously, and got stung a few times. I deserved it though. Don't go beating up animal homes. Story 13. Hunted by a big cat while camping. It started early in the day when my friend's dog started barking at the bushes near our campsite. We wrote it off as the paranoid little just being his paranoid little self. Let me tell you though, there were times that day that I could just feel something's eyes on me. At dusk we came across some animal bones, mostly small things like birds, but tried to write it off as leftovers from a hawk's meals. I really wish we'd have taken it as a sign and just up and left right there. That night we could hear something in the bushes. The dog went on full alert, and not in a don't mess with me kind of confident way, but an oh crap we should really leave right now kind of way. All that my friend and I had between us and whatever was in those bushes was a thin tent, and at that point it became very hard to accept the circumstances. You tried to make that tent a fortress made of stone in your mind, because the reality of it becomes too much to bear. Eventually, we did come to terms with reality and agreed that whatever was making that noise, we needed to do something about the situation because a tent might not be enough to protect us. So my friend peeks out with a flashlight and there they are, big eyes in the bushes glowing right back at us. I don't know if any of you have had the experience of your blood running cold, but for an instant I was so cold it hurt. I don't know how long we stared into the bush, back at the eyes, but it got primal. There was no cognitive thought going on beyond my base instinct to just stay dead still. My friend's dog eventually got up the courage to peer out with us and yipped when it saw the eyes, and then boom, out it came, charging at our tent. It was the biggest tabby cat I ever saw, as big as a Maine Coon. I damn near hit myself as it scampered right past our tent. I never camped out in my friend's backyard again. Story 14. I've been woken up by a bear sniffing my head once, was cowboy camping, no tent, in Lyle Canyon in Yosemite once, when I heard something sniff right next to my head. My sleep-addled brain thinks it's a ranger on a horse telling me to move my camp. Had hiked about 20 miles that day. You have to be at least 4 miles into the canyon to camp, and I wasn't 100% sure I'd made it far enough since it was dark when I set up camp. Anyways, I say, just 1 second, sit up, grope for my flashlight, and turn it on to see a black bear a couple of feet away. I holler, and he tears off. I get out and empty my bladder and try to fall back asleep until I hear him coming around again. I make a bunch more noise, decide I'm not getting any more sleep, break camp, and slowly hike until the sun rises. Story 15, up of Michigan. I was bow hunting for whitetail, sitting in full camo on a downed tree, leaning against another tree in a dark, thick cedar swamp. I dozed off for a while and woke to the crunching sound of footsteps. I darted my eyes around and saw the back end of a canine as it stalked through the trees within about 20 yards, going from my right to my left. From the reddish in the fur, I assumed it was a coyote and not a wolf, although I didn't see it long, and it was a big coyote. As it got far enough to the left, I lost sight completely behind the tree I was leaning against and could only hear it. I sat there with an arrow nocked, just listening, when suddenly I heard and felt a thud of this animal jumping up on the log I was sitting on. I sat there and listened to sniffing sounds at the back of my head for a few seconds. It then jumped back down and I heard it trot away, as calmly as it had approached. My heart was racing the whole time, but it wasn't terrifying, since coyotes' wolves pose literally zero threat to humans. Story 16. When I was 5, I lived in Berlin, Germany. I had an obsession with trying to hunt and kill wild boars in the forest, so my dad and I would walk around with spears, sharpened twigs basically. We never saw any, so it wasn't a huge deal until one day we spooked a mother and her piglets. The next thing my dad sees is me chasing them until the snow stops, turns all 200 pounds towards me, and stares me down. Luckily, my dad scooped me up before I could charge because I was about to. Hindsight 2020 doesn't do that. I would have probably been mauled. Story 17. I have a few good animal stories, but the scariest was getting charged by an angry bull shark. I was down in Florida with my family, and my dad, brother 11, and sister 6 were all decently far out hanging out when we spotted the shark. It was probably between 4 to 4.5 feet. My dad and I went shoulder to shoulder with my siblings behind us and started quickly but calmly heading in. This thing must have charged us nearly half a dozen times at or near full speed and only broke off when it got within 10-15 feet. I don't know if you've ever seen a shark hunt at full speed, but they're significantly faster than I could sprint on land. The feeling was in its world, and if it wants one of us, it's probably going to take one. So we finally get in, and the shark heads down the beach. I look down and there's another family with a small girl in a life jacket out in the water. So I ran down and yelled at them, but they weren't listening. I figured I was bigger than it, and if it were going to attack me it would have, so I started swimming out to them. I popped up about 15 feet from the girl with the dad on her other side, and that shark was right in between us. Without thinking about it, I jumped forward and slapped the water and I think spooked it. I jumped forward and grabbed the girl, which the dad, who hadn't seen the shark, didn't appreciate, LOL. I pointed it out and gave him back his daughter, and we got back in. He was incredibly thankful once he understood the situation. But yeah, sharks have barely changed in hundreds of millions of years, and that day I truly appreciated exactly why. Like I said, if it had wanted to take me, I don't realistically think the four of us could have actually stopped it. Story 18. I was cycling up a mountain in the Scottish Highlands. My gran lives there. And as I went round a corner, I came face to face with a huge Highland cow that was running down the mountain the opposite way. Instead of jumping off the path, I thought the cow was friendly and edged over to let me by. Big mistake. It threw its head as I went by, almost impaling me and throwing me off the path and into a 20-foot tumble down the mountain. Story 19. I was attacked by a giant monstrous goose. It was at least the size of a goose, and it was as wild and dangerous as a goose. Okay, it was just a normal goose, but it was really scary. I was just minding my own business, taking a walk while listening to music, when this evil creature decides that I'm its mortal enemy and starts charging me out of nowhere. Thanks to my vigorous training and extensive experience, I handled the situation in a calm and stoic fashion by shrieking like a girl and punching the critter on top of its head, and then, not unlike a small child that has just kicked a ball through the neighbor's window, I panicked and ran the away. I am the living embodiment of masculinity. Story 20, just last week. Went to walk into the toilet at home only to discover a massive green tree frog in the doorway. Not scary to some, I know, but I have a phobia about them and was absolutely terrifyingly out of my mind, screaming, scared, hit the hallway wall while screaming for my husband, and then sat on top of the kitchen table while he took the frog outside in case it got loose and hopped around and attacked my legs. My family thinks it's hysterically funny and continues to give me frog-themed gifts at Christmas and birthdays. They're all sitting in a box in the cupboard and I refuse to look at them. Story 21. I was tree planting in northern BC. Was working on the same piece as another planter for about an hour, then heard a soft thumping sound. Looked up and saw an adult grizzly bear running towards the other planter, whose back was to the bear. I started running towards it, waving my arms and yelling. The bear stopped, turned towards me, and stood on its hind legs. I stopped moving and was about 20-30 feet away from it. The bear stared at me for about 5 seconds, felt like an eternity, dropped back down, turned around, and bolted back into the tree line. Saw 2 cubs with it that we weren't anywhere close to, so we figured it was probably a mother teaching its cubs how to hunt. I had to sit down for a while after that because my legs were shaking so badly. Story 22. Attacked by a nurse shark. I was spearfishing off of Nass, Key West for hogfish, and the blood in the water attracted a large nurse shark. We kept getting in the boat and moving a half-mile away, but he would catch up 20 minutes later following the boat. In the third spot, we had a wounded hogfish get off the spear and hide under a coral head. The nurse shark showed up and was rooting around under it, trying to get at the hogfish. I was snorkeling about 15 feet above watching nature at work when the shark decided to turn at me. Luckily, I had my spear and jabbed it in his nose, mostly as a reflex of it being the only thing I could put between me and him, which promptly scared him off. Honestly, one of the scariest moments of my life, looking eye to eye with an apex predator that intended to attack me. Nurse sharks are normally not aggressive, which is why I was swimming so close to him, but that quickly ended our day and we called it quits and went home. At least it was a nurse shark and not one of the other, more aggressive bitey species in the Keys. Also, hogfish is delicious. Story 23. I cycled at speed past a pack of feral dogs and triggered their prey instinct. I was out on a straight road, slightly downhill, in the middle of nowhere. When I saw them getting ready, I knew I had to go past them as it was too late to stop and cycle back uphill, and besides, that was the only road home. I committed. They chased. I pedaled harder than I have ever pedaled and eventually lost them, but I didn't turn around to look for quite a while. I checked my bike computer when I got home and saw that I had hit 79 kilometers per hour. The scariest part was realizing I would trigger them and that I had to go through the pack, hoping they wouldn't trip me up as either the fall or the dogs would have maimed me. Story 24. Magpies. I was riding my bike to primary school one day, and 2 streets away, out of nowhere, I felt the flap of wings on my shoulder, and it flew by in front of me. It was quite large, probably an adult, and it came back, but I saw it and ducked. After that, it flew by a few more times, repeatedly actually, and it actually hit me a few times hard and left a few beak dents in my helmet. I could only peg my bike as fast as possible to school until I was through its territory. quite a few other instances of being swooped by the black and white deathbirds, but another time with friends I gave myself a bleeding nose after ducking and slamming my face on my own bike's handlebars. My friends thought that was funny. Story 25 went swimming at the beach and decided to race my mate out to the shark net buoys. I'm 5 meters away, giving it my all when I slap my hand down into the water for my next stroke and hit something really squishy. I stopped and looked up to find I'd booped a box of jellyfish square on the top of the thing. Noped out of there so hard. The worst bit was I didn't even win the race. Story 26, Australian, so taking my life into my own hands by even walking out the door most days. However, between the tiger snake that sat up and flared its damn head like a cobra and then spat at my face when I was 12, and the angry koala that made me climb the bonnet of my car when I was 32, the koala is the most scary. Scene: late night back dirt road with a steep drop on one side and a mountain wall on the other. Big fat koala in the middle of the road, scratching its butt with one death claw while the other shoved leaves into its mouth and glared at me with its beady eyes as it willfully ignored my horn. I was tired and grumpy, so got out and started yelling it at and flapping my arms. Big mistake. The damn thing growled and lunged towards me. Now koala arms are longer than you realize, and they are tipped with death claws that can plunge into hardwood. So I ran back to my car, but wasn't going to open the door. Instead, I lunged at the bull bar and climbed onto the bonnet. Death claws, McGee followed, swinging up like a monkey, still growling like the spawn of Satan's most steedy-ridden teddy. I scrambled backward and up the windscreen, drawing my legs back just in time to see the claws scratch down my windshield. Luckily, they couldn't grip. Scream growling in frustration, the fat, fluffy terror sat on my bonnet and hooked both windshield wipers back and out while it grumbled and grunted, not 4 feet below me. Needless to say, I escaped. A passing milk tanker stopped, and the guy used a prod to get the evil, scratchy creature off my car and march it back into the bush and whatever hellish portal it escaped from. The trucker then proceeds to double over in laughter as he helps me down and surveys the damage. So many scratches on the bonnet and glass. Trucker tells everyone that day and the next about saving me from the rabid beastie. I am both mocked and revered. Story 27. When my partner and I went to Bali, we went on a walk around Sanur. We figured we'd take a shortcut back to our resort going down what looked like a pathway. Turns out it was a dead end, but no problem, we turned back. The problem is, this square-headed dog that looks like a mixed Pitbull is now standing on the pathway, snarling at us. I'm pretty okay with animals. Usually, even if they're aggressive, I can keep my cool, but this dog looks like he's one half blink away from mauling us. It's mangy as f*** with a crazy glint in its eyes too, and with how prevalent rabies is in Indonesia, I'm freaking the f*** out. We edge around this dog painfully slow so as not to provoke it, and with any movement that's a little quicker than snail's pace, it tenses its muscles and growls and barks. We got out okay, but I swear it was only by the skin of our teeth. That thing wanted meat. Story 28. I was riding someone's horse. The dude started losing control of the horse, shouting commands louder and louder, but the horse galloped faster and faster. Eventually, the dude couldn't hold on to the rope thing, and it was just me and the horse who was speeding towards a cliff as if it was suicidal. I was thinking about whether or not I should jump off, and when I should jump, and I got my foot stuck in some rope. Luckily, the horse wasn't suicidal, so he stopped at the edge. To this day, I'm not sure if the horse trolled me, the horse owner trolled me, or a suicidal horse relented, so I didn't die with it.